My late wife's heirloom engagement ring vanished from our bedroom 3 weeks after she died. Her own brother sold it for $22,000. I didn't know who took it until my sister-in-law Rachel walked into a pawnshop 40 miles from here, asked to see their security footage, and watched Stephen hand my dead wife's ring to a stranger with a receipt in his back pocket and zero hesitation on his face. She was 33 years old, still grieving her sister, and she just became the only person in this family willing to look a thief in the eyes. Rachel never expected to become a detective. Her sister was dead 3 weeks, the ring was gone, and her brother-in-law Daniel was too shattered to search. So she walked into a pawnshop 40 miles away and asked to see their security tapes. What she saw would either save the family or shatter it completely. To understand how Rachel ended up in that pawnshop, you need to go back to the day her sister died. Emily was 36 years old, a mother of two young daughters, and she had been battling ovarian cancer for 18 months. The diagnosis came late. The treatment was brutal, and by the time the doctors admitted there was nothing left to try, the family had already spent every ounce of hope they had. Daniel, her husband, never left her side. He slept in a chair next to her hospital bed for the last 6 weeks, holding her hand through every round of chemo, every false rally, every devastating setback. He was the kind of husband who read to her when she was too weak to hold a book, who learned how to braid their daughter's hair because Emily couldn't lift her arms anymore. When she finally passed on a Tuesday morning in late September, something inside Daniel broke that would not heal for a very long time. The ring had been in Emily's family for 4 generations. It was a vintage European-cut diamond set in platinum, appraised at $22,000, but its real value was impossible to measure. Emily's great-grandmother wore it through 2 world wars. Her grandmother wore it for 63 years of marriage. Her mother passed it down to her on her wedding day with a letter that said, "This ring has seen love survive everything. Now it's your turn." Emily wore it every single day of her marriage, through 2 pregnancies, through sickness, through every hard and beautiful moment. She told Rachel once that she planned to give it to her own daughter someday, and then to her granddaughter after that. The ring was never just jewelry. It was the closest thing the family had to a physical timeline of their love. 3 weeks after the funeral, the ring vanished. Daniel had been keeping it in a small wooden box on his dresser, next to a photo of Emily on their wedding day. He couldn't bring himself to lock it away. He wanted it close, where he could see it, touch it, remember her. One evening, he went to open the box and it was empty. He assumed he had moved it somewhere, grief scrambling his memory. He searched the entire house, emptied every drawer, checked every jacket pocket. Nothing. Rachel came over the next morning to help with the girls, and Daniel broke down. He told her about the ring, but he could barely form the words. He kept saying, "It was here, I swear it was here, I would never lose it, not that, not her ring." Rachel believed him. Daniel had been forgetful lately, yes. He forgot to eat, forgot appointments, forgot what day it was, but he would never misplace that ring. It was the one thing he protected more than himself. Rachel started asking quiet questions. Who had been in the house since the funeral? Daniel's parents, a few neighbors, some church friends bringing meals, and Daniel's older brother, Stephen. Stephen had driven down from Hartford 2 weeks ago, supposedly to check on Daniel and offer support. He stayed for one night. He spent most of that time in the living room while Daniel was putting the girls to bed. He left early the next morning before Daniel woke up. Rachel had known Stephen for years. He was charming, unreliable, always between jobs, always borrowing money that he promised to pay back and never did. Emily never trusted him. She once told Rachel, "Stephen loves Daniel, but he loves himself more. That's a dangerous combination." Rachel remembered those words as she stood in Daniel's bedroom staring at the empty wooden box. She checked every pawnshop within 10 miles of Daniel's house. Nothing. She expanded her search. 20 miles, 30 miles. She called each place, described the ring in exact detail, sent photos, asked if anyone had brought in a vintage platinum ring with a European-cut diamond. Most shop owners said no immediately. A few took her number and promised to call if anything came in. Then she drove 40 miles north to a small pawnshop on the edge of a strip mall, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions. The owner, a man named Frank, listened to her story without interruption. When she finished, he rubbed the back of his neck and said, "I might have something, come look at the tape." He led her to a back office with a small monitor. He pulled up the security footage from 6 days earlier. Rachel leaned forward and watched the grainy image flicker to life. And there, walking through the front door with a ring box in his hand, was Stephen. Rachel froze in front of the monitor. The footage was timestamped October 17th, 11 in the morning. Stephen walked in wearing a gray hoodie, but his face was unmistakable. He approached the counter, glanced over his shoulder, then pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Frank remembered the moment clearly because Stephen had been nervous, sweat on his forehead, hands shaking. He opened the box. Inside was Emily's ring, the four-generation heirloom, the diamond catching the fluorescent light. Frank asked for identification. Stephen handed over a driver's license. Frank photocopied it. He weighed the ring, tested the diamond, and offered $7,000. Stephen took the cash without negotiating, which Frank found odd. Most people at least try to haggle. Stephen just grabbed the bills, signed the pawn slip, and walked out. Frank never saw him again. Rachel sat in that back office with the receipt in her hands, staring at her brother-in-law's signature. The documentation was perfect. The video, the ID, the transaction record, everything she needed to prove what happened. But knowing and proving were different from understanding why. Stephen was Daniel's older brother. They grew up in the same house, shared a bedroom until high school, stood next to each other at weddings and funerals. What could possibly make a man steal his dead sister-in-law's engagement ring while his brother was grieving in the next room? Rachel started digging. And what she found made the theft look like the smallest part of a much bigger problem. She called a friend who worked in financial investigations. She gave him Stephen's full name and date of birth. Within 2 days, he came back with a report that made her stomach turn. Stephen had accumulated nearly $85,000 in gambling debt over the previous 18 months. He had maxed out 4 credit cards, taken out 2 high-interest personal loans, and borrowed money from at least 3 different payday lenders. His bank account was overdrawn by $1,400. He had stopped making mortgage payments 3 months earlier, and his house was in pre-foreclosure. The $7,000 he got for Emily's ring didn't even cover the interest payments on what he owed. But there was something else in the report. A series of small deposits over the past year, each between $500 and $2,000, all coming from a source Rachel recognized. Daniel and Emily's joint checking account. Stephen had been stealing from them for months, long before Emily died. He had access to their account because Daniel had added him as an authorized user after their father passed away, for emergencies. Stephen had been skimming money for over a year, small amounts that Daniel never noticed, especially while Emily was in treatment. The ring was just the final, most visible theft. By the time Rachel put the full picture together, she realized Stephen hadn't just stolen a piece of jewelry. He had been systematically draining his dying sister-in-law's family to feed a gambling addiction no one knew about. Now Rachel faced a brutal choice. If she went to the police immediately, Stephen would be arrested. A felony theft conviction for an item worth $22,000 could mean years in prison. Daniel would lose his brother on top of losing his wife. Their parents would be devastated. The whole family could collapse under the weight of it. But if she said nothing, Stephen would keep stealing. He would find another way to feed his addiction. He might even come after the girls' college funds next. Rachel needed time to think, and she needed to find out exactly where the ring was. Frank told her he still had it, because in that state, pawnshops are required to hold items for a certain number of days before selling them, giving police time to flag stolen property. The hold period had almost expired. Rachel had 48 hours to act before the ring would be legally sold to the public, or worse, melted down for scrap. Frank had seen it happen before. He told her, "You'd be surprised how many priceless heirlooms end up as a puddle of gold on some refinery floor." The clock was ticking. She drove back to Daniel's house that evening and found him sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. The girls were with his mother. He hadn't eaten all day. Rachel sat down beside him and told him everything. The pawnshop, the footage, the receipt, the gambling debts, the stolen money from their account. Daniel listened without moving, his face blank. When she finished, he whispered, "He came to the funeral. He hugged me. He told me Emily was like a sister to him." Then he put his head in his hands and cried. Rachel waited. She knew he needed to process the betrayal before they could figure out what to do next. But they only had 2 days. The next morning, Daniel called Stephen. He didn't accuse him. He just asked his brother to come over, said he needed help with something at the house. Stephen agreed, sounding cheerful on the phone. Rachel couldn't believe the gall of it, but Daniel had a plan. He wanted to confront Stephen directly, face to face, with the evidence in hand. He wanted to give his brother a chance to confess before getting the police involved. Rachel thought it was a mistake. She believed Stephen would deny everything, destroy evidence, disappear. But Daniel insisted. This was his brother. He needed to hear the truth from Stephen's own mouth, no matter how much it destroyed him. Rachel agreed to be there, but she brought the pawnshop footage on her phone, the receipt, the financial records. She wasn't taking any chances. Stephen arrived at 4 in the afternoon. He walked in with a six-pack of beer and a smile that vanished the moment he saw Rachel sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of her. Daniel walked him to the table and said, "Sit down. We need to talk about Emily's ring." Stephen's face went pale. His hands started trembling. He tried the usual deflections. "What ring? I thought you lost it. I told you, bro, you've been so stressed lately you probably just misplaced it." Daniel pulled out a still image from the security footage, printed on glossy paper, showing Stephen at the pawnshop counter with the ring box open. He slid it across the table. Stephen stared at his own face, caught in a moment he could never explain away. The silence stretched. Then Stephen's shoulders slumped and he started talking. But the words that came out were not an apology. They were something Rachel never expected to hear. Stephen told them about the gambling. It started small, casual bets on sports games, a few $100s here and there, then it spiraled. He discovered online casinos. He started chasing losses, convinced the next big win would fix everything. He borrowed from friends, then from loan sharks. When those sources dried up, he started taking from Daniel and Emily's account. Small amounts at first, telling himself he'd pay it back. He never did. By the time Emily got sick, he was in so deep he couldn't see a way out. The ring was an impulse, he said. He saw it in the bedroom while Daniel was putting the girls to sleep. He knew it was valuable. He told himself it was just a thing, that Emily would have wanted to help him, that Daniel didn't need it anymore. The lies he told himself were almost as devastating as the theft itself. Rachel listened to this confession with a cold knot forming in her chest. But then Stephen said something that reframed everything. He wasn't just a thief driven by addiction. He had a plan to repay the debts. He was working with a debt consolidation service, hadn't made a bet in 3 weeks, and the ring was supposed to be the last thing he ever stole. He had been trying to get clean for 2 months. Ever since Emily's funeral made him confront what he had become. He hated himself for taking the ring. He cried on the drive home from the pawnshop. But the thing that truly shook Rachel was this: Stephen had kept a ledger. Every penny he had stolen from Daniel and Emily over the years, listed in a notebook with a promise to repay every cent. He pulled it from his bag and put it on the table. The total was $47,000. The ring was never about greed. It was about desperation, shame, and a man who had lost control of his life and was trying desperately to claw his way back. The theft was wrong, but the person behind it was far more complicated than a simple villain. Now the question was what to do about the ring itself. It was still at the pawnshop, but the hold period expired in less than 36 hours. Stephen had pawned it, not sold it outright, which meant it could be redeemed if someone paid the loan plus fees. But the $7,000 Stephen received was long gone, already handed over to a loan shark who had been threatening him. To get the ring back, they needed to come up with the redemption money, plus the shop's storage fee, a total of $8,200. If they didn't, the ring would be gone forever. And even then, the shop owner had legal obligations. If he suspected the ring was stolen, he was required to report it. The moment Rachel involved the police, the ring would become evidence. It might sit in a property room for months or years. There was no easy path to bringing Emily's ring home. Rachel made a decision. She called Frank and told him the ring was stolen, that they had a confession, but they wanted to handle it without destroying the family. Frank was surprisingly understanding. His own sister had struggled with addiction. He agreed to extend the hold for 72 hours if Rachel filed a police report that documented the theft and identified Stephen as the perpetrator. That would protect the shop legally without triggering an immediate arrest. It gave them time to figure out a plan. Rachel thanked him and hung up. Then she turned to Daniel and Stephen and said, "We have 3 days to fix this. After that, I'm letting the system take over." The next morning, Rachel drove to the police station with Daniel beside her. She filed a report, told the detective everything, and watched as he entered the ring into a national database of stolen property. They showed the footage, the receipt, Stephen's confession recorded on Rachel's phone. The detective was ready to issue an arrest warrant, but Rachel asked for something unusual. She wanted the police to give them a chance to recover the ring privately before moving forward with charges. The detective was skeptical. He had seen family theft cases tear people apart, but Daniel begged him, and eventually he agreed to hold off for 72 hours as long as Rachel kept him updated. The countdown began. They had 3 days to find $8,200 and fix a family that was cracking at every seam. And then Rachel found out what else Stephen had been hiding. A second debt, this one to people who didn't accept repayment plans. The kind of people who don't wait 72 hours for anything, and they were already looking for him. Rachel found the name while looking through Stephen's phone. Marco Emilio. 26 missed calls in 3 days, voicemails that started polite and ended with threats about broken legs and fires that start in the middle of the night. Stephen owed Marco $12,000. The original loan had been $5,000 to cover a gambling loss. Interest compounded weekly at 20%. By the time Rachel traced the number, the debt had ballooned to a figure Stephen could never pay back. And Marco didn't accept repayment plans. He accepted cash or he accepted consequences. The 72-hour clock for the ring was already down to 48, and now there was a second countdown running in parallel, this one measured in kneecaps. Rachel called the detective. She explained the loan shark, the threats, the voicemails. The detective's name was Ronan, a 20-year veteran who had seen every flavor of family tragedy. He listened without interrupting, then said, "If Stephen cooperates, we can use this. Marco's been on our radar for 2 years. We've never had a witness willing to testify. Your brother-in-law might be our in. But it means no arrest for the ring theft yet, and it means Stephen wears a wire." Rachel put the phone down and explained the deal to Daniel. Stephen, sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, agreed immediately. He was desperate to claw back some part of his humanity. If testifying against a loan shark would keep his family from disowning him entirely, he would do it. The next morning, Stephen walked into a diner on the south side of town wearing a recording device taped to his chest. Marco was already there, arms crossed, large and unimpressed. Stephen told him he needed more time. Marco laughed, then leaned across the table and said he would give Stephen 24 hours before he started visiting addresses. The address of Stephen's mother, the address of Daniel's house, the address of the girls' school. Every word was captured on the wire. 6 units from the sheriff's office were listening live. Marco didn't finish his coffee before they swarmed the diner and took him into custody. With Marco arrested and the loan shark threat neutralized, the family turned back to the pawnshop clock. 12 hours remained. The redemption price was $8,200. Stephen had nothing. Daniel's savings had been drained by funeral costs and medical bills. Rachel had been quietly saving for a down payment on a house, a future she had been building alone. She drove to the bank, withdrew every cent, and handed the envelope to Daniel without asking for anything in return. They arrived at Frank's pawnshop with 4 hours to spare. Frank pulled the ring from the safe, the same vintage platinum setting Emily had worn every day of her adult life, the same diamond that had survived 2 world wars and 63 years of marriage on her grandmother's finger. Daniel held it in his palm and broke down. Frank shook Rachel's hand and slid the receipt across the counter, marking it redeemed in full. The ring was home, but Rachel wasn't finished. She knew Stephen's confession to them in the kitchen wasn't enough. The theft had fractured trust inside the wider family, and keeping it secret would only let the wound fester. She made a decision. There would be a family gathering, the first since Emily's funeral. Everyone would attend. And Rachel would present the footage, the receipt, the ledger of stolen money, not to destroy Stephen, but to force everything into the light so that real healing could begin. What she hadn't told anyone yet was that she had already drafted a repayment plan in Stephen's name, one that would let him make amends to Daniel and every relative he had stolen from, with oversight and addiction treatment attached. She was about to walk into a room full of people who had no idea their trust had been violated and tell them the truth while Stephen sat among them. The family gathered on a Saturday afternoon in mid-November, 43 people crammed into Daniel's living room. They had come from as far as Florida, all believing they were there to share memories of Emily. Rachel had printed stills from the pawnshop footage, the receipt, the financial records, and arranged them inside a folder she kept closed on her lap. Stephen was seated in the corner, pale, his knee bouncing. He knew what was coming and he did not run. Rachel stood. She spoke about Emily's ring first, about the great-grandmother who wore it through 2 world wars, about the 63-year marriage it witnessed, about the letter Emily wrote to her own daughter promising the ring would be hers one day. Then she opened the folder and held up the first image for everyone to see. It showed Stephen walking into Frank's pawnshop, the ring box in his hand. The room went silent. Daniel's mother covered her mouth. Rachel walked them through every piece of evidence. The timestamp. The photocopied driver's license. The pawn slip with Stephen's signature. The $7,000 he accepted, the ledger that tallied $47,000 stolen over 18 months. She did not editorialize, she let the facts land like stones. When she finished, Stephen stood up. His voice was shaking, but he did not look away. He told his entire family about the gambling, how it started with sports bets and ended with online casinos and loan sharks. He told them about the moment he took the ring from Daniel's dresser while his nieces were asleep down the hall. He told them he hated himself every second since. Then he said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that Rachel and Daniel gave me a chance to fix this, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying." The room erupted. Some relatives shouted at Stephen, called him a thief, demanded he leave. Others wept. Daniel's father stood up and walked out, too angry to speak. But Rachel raised her hand, and the noise settled. She pulled out a document she had drafted with a lawyer, a repayment plan that required Stephen to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings every week, to submit to quarterly financial audits by a third-party accountant, and to repay every stolen dollar with interest over 5 years. The first payment, she announced, had already been made. It was the $8,200 she had taken from her own savings to redeem the ring from Frank's pawnshop. Stephen would repay her too, with interest. And if he missed a single payment or failed a single drug test, the police report she had filed would be activated, and felony charges would follow immediately. This was not a second chance without consequence. This was a lifeline with teeth. Daniel stood up next. He pulled Emily's ring from his pocket and held it in his open palm so everyone could see the diamond catching the afternoon light. He said, "This ring was supposed to go to my daughter Lily when she turns 18. Emily talked about it all the time. She wanted Lily to wear it at her wedding and then her daughter after that." He paused, looked at Stephen, and his voice cracked. "I am not going to let what you did erase what Emily wanted. This ring will still go to Lily. And when she asks about it, I will tell her the whole story. The love and the betrayal. The theft and the recovery. Because that is what this family is now. Broken and rebuilt. And I am choosing the rebuilt part." Something shifted in the room. One by one, relatives who had been ready to disown Stephen started to soften. Not everyone. Some left angry and never fully came back. But Daniel's mother walked across the room and put her hand on Stephen's shoulder and said, "You are still my son. We will get through this." Rachel watched the scene unfold and felt something she had not felt since Emily died. Hope, not the naive kind. The kind that has been dragged through the mud and still stands. A week later, Frank the pawnshop owner called Rachel. He had been reviewing old footage, he said, and found something she needed to see. It was from another camera angle outside the shop, the morning Stephen sold the ring. The footage showed Stephen sitting in his car in the parking lot, motionless for 10 full minutes before he finally opened the door. Then he put his head on the steering wheel and sobbed. He cried like a man who had lost everything, because in that moment he had. Rachel saved that footage too. She never released it to the family. She kept it as a private reminder that the worst acts are sometimes committed by people drowning in their own destruction, and that accountability is not the same as cruelty. Daniel took the ring to a jeweler the following spring. He had it reset, the original platinum band polished and reinforced, the diamond cleaned until it threw rainbows onto the ceiling. He engraved a small inscription inside the band that read, "For Lily, from 4 generations of strong women who never gave up." He placed it in a safe deposit box with instructions that it be released to his daughter on her 18th birthday, along with a letter explaining its full history. The security footage from the pawnshop, he decided, would be included too, so that Lily would understand what the ring had survived to reach her hand. Rachel never asked for recognition. She went back to her quiet life, her job, her own half-finished plans. But the family never forgot what she did. And neither did Stephen, who walked into his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting 3 days after the family gathering and kept walking through those doors every week for the next year. The debt was repaid. The charges were never filed. And Emily's ring waited in the dark of a bank vault for a girl who would one day wear it down an aisle, carrying the weight and the redemption of everyone who came before her. Rachel never asked for a thank you. She simply did what love demanded. She walked into a pawnshop, followed a paper trail, and refused to look away when the truth got ugly. In a world where it's easier to let sleeping ghosts lie, she chose the harder thing. She chose accountability with compassion, justice without annihilation. What happened inside that family could have gone a very different way. Stephen could have faced prison. The ring could have been melted down. Daniel could have lost his brother, and his only tangible link to Emily in the same season he lost his wife. Instead, Because one woman believed that redemption was possible, but not free, a daughter will one day hold a piece of her history that violence and addiction could not destroy. Question that lingers is how many families have a similar theft buried in silence, not just of jewelry but of trust, and how many of them are waiting for someone with enough courage to open the folder and let the truth do its painful, necessary work. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you are listening from. I read every one. I'm grateful you chose to spend this time with me. Some stories break your heart and then stitch it back together. This was one of them. Until next time.